Welcome back. In this video, we're going to be talking about Saturn in Pisces. I'm happy to introduce you to my good friend, Christine Linwood, who is an astrologer here in Canada. She's going to be sharing with us her thoughts about Saturn's recent transit through Pisces. It will be starting this year, 2023, and continuing on for a couple of years. So we're going to explore a lot of that right now. So welcome, Christine. It's so nice to have you join me here today.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So perhaps we could start, if you could just share with us a little bit about what brought you to astrology in the first place.
I was interested in the zodiac when I was a young girl, but it wasn't until my first Saturn return that I began to study astrology. And one's first Saturn return, Saturn's return to its natal position in the birth chart, can be experienced as a rupture or a split. And I had recently moved to Canada at the time, and I was living with a boyfriend, and our relationship broke up. And shortly afterwards, I had this dream that I had survived a great earthquake. And in my dream, I was walking along a rocky beach. And in my dream, I thought of it as being Kitsilano Beach, but it was a really rocky beach in my dream in the morning after everything had come down,
Right.
after this great earthquake. And every rock that I came to on the beach, I would turn it over. And underneath the rock, there would be a little bit of myself, a little part of myself, and little bits of memories, parts of my life under each rock.
Wow.
And I found myself in my dream having to decide whether to discard what was under the rock or whether to keep it. And it was a dream about defining who I was and rebuilding after this earthquake. In reality, I was 27 years old. I was living in a new country, Canada, working at a new job. I was very much alone and I had very few friends. I was coping with severe depression, although I didn't know it at the time. I went to see a doctor, and that doctor referred me to a psychiatrist.
Uh-huh.
And my family was in the States at this time. They were all residing in the Seattle area. So later on, when I was in a much better state, it was suggested to me by a friend that we both have our astrology charts drawn. And I
Okay.
had never done this. And I had always wanted to have an astrology reading. And so she let me choose the astrologer that we went to see. And I found the name of an astrologer in the Shared Vision magazine, and her name was Anne Black. And so that's who we went to see at that time. And I specifically went to her wanting to know how long my depression was going to last. Was it going to end, or was it always going to be with me? And she told me at that time that I was experiencing my first Saturn return. And she explained to me a few details about my chart. And at that time during the reading, she suggested that I might want to study my chart a bit further. And she told me that she normally didn't recommend her clients to go out and buy books and start studying their charts in great detail. But she felt that in my case, it might be helpful for me. And so after the reading, I immediately walked down the street, back down 4th Avenue to Banyan Books at their old location. And I went in the store and I bought a couple of astrology books. And that was how I began my study in astrology. And it was a really great experience having that reading. I worked with her for a number of years, going to her for consultations and getting acquainted with my chart, studying astrology. And then after she had moved to the island, I found myself just continuing to dabble in astrology here and there. It wasn't until after I married that I really began to take my studies in astrology very seriously. And that's when I began to study with Don Muncaster. And then I became involved as a student of the CAAE. I also studied at the Faculty of Astrological Studies. I still study with them, and I'm still working towards my diplomas with the faculty. So for me, it is very much a journey about being a student of astrology.
Wow. So really your first introduction to astrology was through this Saturn return, as this planet um, created perhaps some upheaval in your life that you felt you needed to address. So would you say that that is, I know we're talking about Saturn and Pisces today, but by now there are many other planets surely that interest you, or would you say you're still following Saturn closely?
For me, it was not really a matter of being interested in Saturn.
Right.
Um, it was, Saturn in Aquarius is the strongest planet in my chart, and it tenants the cusp of my sixth house, and it opposes my Leo moon. And my Leo moon is on the cusp of the 12th house. And so I was really required, it is nearly an exact opposition in my chart. It is, this opposition is occurring or applying just before the moon is going void of course. And so it is a very strong aspect in my chart. And so I've needed to journey with Saturn. And I'm still learning how to honor and respect what Saturn is asking of me, especially in areas of work and creativity and self-expression, and even daily sustenance. So Saturn has always been asking me to define who I am, um, and what and wholeness and what is creating a whole individual. And when I had my first reading with Anne Black, she told me that one of the greatest gifts in life is the gift of having a self. And I've had a few other astrologers comment about this aspect in my chart as being the gift of defining the self. And I've never forgotten those words. And so in my journey with Saturn, I've always paid attention to what it was doing in my chart. As time has gone on, I have become very much embracing of my Saturn. I've fallen in love with Saturn
Right.
and Saturn in my chart. And I am learning how to work with Saturn. And a lot of people really fear Saturn.
Yes.
But I find that Saturn is the planet that really is shaping what we can contribute in our lives. And Saturn is really here to help us take responsibility for ourselves. And it is, in a way, it is shaping our soul's journey.
Wow. It's very interesting because so many people will almost demonize Saturn as a very challenging planet, which of course it can be. And but it appears that you have risen above it and are now embracing very much the positive side of this planet.
It wasn't always that way. And in fact, when I began my studies at the faculty, I was very much in the, oh, I have a really heavy Saturn. And in fact, when I referred to Saturn, I would say Saturn, and bring this heaviness about it.
Right.
And people would kind of laugh and I guess it maybe made them more comfortable or help them tune in to Saturn. But as I began to work with it and, go through its squares and its oppositions and embrace my own shadow side and my own depression and working with that, I began to work with this Saturn. And I really have come to respect the planet and the strength of the planet.
Amazing, amazing. Wow. So what we're looking, what you're saying is that with if your natal Saturn is in Aquarius, then that's perhaps where Saturn is now. Would you agree with that?
Yes, actually, last year I just finished up or at the end of December, I've just finished up my second Saturn return,
Wow.
second
Wow.
Saturn cycle, and so I'm beginning a new Saturn cycle as we're creating this video. Yes,
Amazing. And here we are looking at now Saturn in Pisces, which is what we're looking at for 2023. Um,
yes.
so perhaps you could tell us a little bit about this Saturn's movement into Pisces. When can we expect this sort of to unfold?
Okay, well, Saturn has been in Aquarius since December 17th, 2020.
Right.
And before that, Saturn was transiting in Capricorn from December 2017. And in traditional astrology, Saturn rules both Capricorn and Aquarius. It is important at this point to keep in mind that in December of 2020, we experienced a great conjunction between Saturn and Jupiter at 0 degrees Aquarius.
Right.
And this was the beginning of a new 20-year cycle. Um, 20 years, every 20 years, Saturn and Jupiter come together in a great conjunction. But in this case, it was also the beginning of a new 200-year cycle because previously the conjunctions had occurred in earth signs, and at this time they were occurring in air. So we're still very much at the beginning of a new Saturn Jupiter cycle. And so this is something to kind of keep in mind.
Mhm.
But we've been experiencing a really strong Saturn transit in signs of domicile or in signs of dignity for the last 6 years. And when Saturn enters Pisces, Saturn is going to lose its essential dignity and it's going to come under the influence of Jupiter, the traditional ruler of Pisces, and Neptune, its modern co ruler. And so Saturn will no longer be in its dignified position. And so moving into Pisces, this can be not easy for Saturn, uncomfortable, because it's used to having its power. And so now we're going into a state where it is peregrine. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay, so Christine, so when is this all happening? Could you share a little bit about that with us, please?
Sure. Saturn is ingressing into Pisces on March 7th of 2023, and it's doing this very early in the morning, 5:34 a.m. at Pacific time. So if one lives on the East Coast of North America, they would add 3 hours to this time. So this ingress would occur like at 8:30 in the morning. When Saturn ingresses into Pisces, it's not going to make any major aspects to any of the other planets. It does, however, make a semi-square to Jupiter and Chiron. And at the time of this ingress, Jupiter is applying to Chiron for a conjunction. And so we have a Jupiter Chiron conjunction that is going to perfect on March 11th and 12th. And this semi-square from Saturn at the time of its ingress is going to continue to tighten until it also becomes exact on March 20th, I believe. Oh, March 21st, excuse me.
Okay.
That is when the sun moves into Aries, and that is when that semi-square is going to perfect.
Okay.
Um, and this semi-square is kind of an agitating, frustrating um, aspect. And so, Saturn may be bringing about more delay, more frustrations, or slowing down of growth and expansion. And so this may occur economically. Um, and so we may see that when Saturn begins its ingress into Pisces.
Okay.
Saturn is going to be in Pisces until February 14th of 2026. And that is when it's going to move into Aries. And shortly after that Aries ingress, Saturn is going to conjunct Neptune in Aries on
Ah,
February 20th, 2026. And this happens at 0 degrees Aries. And at this time, we're going to experience the beginning of a new Saturn-Neptune cycle.
Right.
And so this is a very important aspect that Saturn in Pisces is leading us towards. And in fact, I think around July 2025, I think Saturn comes very, very close to conjuncting Neptune in July of 2025.
Uh-huh.
They come within a degree of each other, but then Saturn turns retrograde and it begins to pull away from that conjunction. And that conjunction also nearly occurs at 1 degree in Aries, but it isn't until it, it actually ingresses into Aries the second time that it conjuncts Neptune at 0 degrees.
Okay, so that's in 2025, you say?
That's in the near conjunction is in 2025.
Okay.
The actual conjunction is in February 2026.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And Saturn's placement in Pisces is not really very easy or comfortable. Saturn represents boundaries, it represents structure and reality, and Saturn seeks to preserve or maintain the status quo. Saturn really asks of us to put in effort, to work, to be self-disciplined, to persevere, to commit, to take responsibility, and to contribute. Saturn really wants us to be proactive. And Pisces seeks to merge with or return to the source. And it wants to connect with the divine and the collective. And Pisces is the last sign of our zodiac. Saturn's most present trek through the zodiac began with Aries in 1998.
Mhm.
And this is coming to a close. And I like to think of this as being a balsamic phase. We are nearing the ending of one Saturn cycle and the beginning of another Saturn cycle.
Right.
And, when we look at the planets, Jupiter has already begun a new cycle with its ingress into Aries in December of 2022.
Yeah.
So Jupiter is forging ahead and it's um, beginning a new cycle of growth and expansion. Uranus ingressed into Aries back in 2011, and that was when it also began a new tour through the zodiac. And it is now in the middle of its cycle in Taurus, or the middle of its transit in Taurus. Neptune is moving towards the late degrees of Pisces. And so Neptune is also preparing to move into Aries, which will be the beginning of a new cycle in Neptune. Pluto is entering Aquarius later this spring. And so we're still experiencing the ending of cycles, the undoing, the breaking up, the separation, and the division that comes with Saturn, Neptune, and Pluto being in the signs of Aquarius and Pisces.
Yeah, so what you're saying is that a lot of the heavier or the very outer planets are shifting towards the end of the zodiac.
Yes,
It's slowly unfolding, and this Saturn entering Pisces is a part of that.
yes, it very much is a part of that. And one of the things that Saturn and Pisces have in common are endings, are letting go, are things coming to a close. And so we're very much in I want to use the term end of days kind of cycle. Yeah,
Interesting. Okay.
yeah. So when we look back at past cycles,
Yes.
um, we can look at past cycles for Saturn and Pisces for some clues about what we might
Okay.
expect. And so when we go back to 1935 to 1938, Saturn was in Pisces at this time. And here in North America, we were dealing with the fallout of the Great Depression, as well as the drought that caused the Dust Bowl. And in Europe at that time, there was also the rise of fascism that led up to the Second World War. Saturn also was in Pisces from 1964 to 1967. And during this period, there was a lot of revolutionary coups and uprisings. The Vietnam War was escalating, and there were a lot of anti-war protests all around the world. And young American men were burning their draft cards. And even in Vietnam, I think there were 20,000 Buddhists that were protesting against the military government in Vietnam. There were also a lot of civil rights marches. There was a lot of racial tensions and race riots. And President Lyndon B. Johnson at that time announced the war on poverty. And this was aimed at reducing racial injustice. Social Security established Medicare and Medicaid at this time. And of course, we had a lot of Cuban refugees begin to arrive in the United States. So Saturn's more recent transit from May 1993 to April 1996, during this period, the world experienced genocide from the Bosnian War between the Croatians and the Serbians.
Yeah.
And also in Rwanda, the devastating genocide that occurred there between the Hutu and the Tutsi rebels, I believe. This also followed the collapse of the Soviet Union, and the Russian economy was really trashed at this time, and there were a lot of economic shockwaves that were rippling around the world from this.
Mm-hmm.
So when we look at our Saturn in ingress Pisces chart, one of the things that is interesting to me is that Saturn is in the first house here in the Pacific time zone.
Okay.
And so it is rising. And it is, and when we look at this on an astrocartographic map, we can see that that Saturn line is ascending just south of Los Angeles, and it's coming through the Western United States and up into Canada. So here is the rising line coming through Canada. You can see my little cursor here following the Saturn ascending line.
So is this the Saturn ingress?
This is the Saturn ingress chart that is coming through the Saturn ingress chart. And so we can see that this is coming through the western half of the United States.
Yes.
And it's going to intersect the Mars conjunct the descendant line. So Mars is on the IC line here.
Uh-huh.
And so this area or this region here is one that stands out to me when I consider the Pisces ingress chart. And it makes me think about the lack of water that we've been experiencing, water receding in the Great Lakes,
Yes.
water issues with the Rio Grande. And it also makes me think about the migrant crisis here as well. And so these may be some issues that Saturn in Pisces has something to say about. The other interesting thing is that Saturn continues to rise. Its midheaven line is actually coming through Greenland and heading south and just off the coast of Brazil. So we may see more issues in Brazil. And then Saturn begins its descension, and it comes through the Soviet Union, Ukraine, and then in through the Middle East. And so this may also be another area where there is continued instability going on in the future.
And because this is the ingress chart, are we saying that this is likely to happen during the time that Saturn is in Pisces over this next 2.5 years? Is this what we're saying? This instability?
I think that the instability will continue, yes, for the
Yes.
next 2.5 years.
Okay, in these particular areas around the globe. Interesting. Super interesting.
Yes. Yes, and actually Saturn is on the descendant here in Australia, and it's coming up just east of Japan, and the just east of Japan, Russia, Korea, and in this area here too.
Right.
And so we may see some instability in this region as well. Actually, we already are seeing tensions rise with China, Korea, Taiwan, and so I think that that is going to continue.
Interesting. Okay, great. These astrocartography maps are quite something once you get the hang of them. It's very interesting to focus in on one of the planets, and it's particularly with it being the ingress chart. That's what makes this, I think, quite dynamic as well. Would you agree with that?
Yes, yes, I would agree with that.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, lots to think about here.
It's going to be interesting to see how this unfolds in the world and what's going on at the time of our ingress when Saturn does move into Pisces.
Exactly.
On a collective level, when we think about Saturn and Pisces, perhaps we may see more waning abundance and growth. We may see some increasing poverty, collective suffering around the world on a collective level. We may experience more drought and water crises. And with that, I also think of the consequences of the drought and the water crisis being water restrictions and facing the consequences of how we use our water and who gets to use our water and how much. We have seen in the past the rise of socialism and or communism. And we may also we may see something in the way of that or a rise in nationalism, but we may also experience awakening compassion for our fellow man. We may take up the responsibility and face the consequences of our actions or our lack of action. Um, it may be an experience of like the lights coming on and realizing that we have been disillusioned for a while. And here we are returning to the reality of situation. And then also cultivating faith and cultivating a spiritual practice and walking a path with purpose. And on a personal level, it will not be the same experience for everyone. Um, Saturn here may ask us to live more purposefully, and it takes a lot of work to live a purposeful life. It
Yeah.
takes a lot of effort to walk the path of a mystic and to live with compassion and empathy and to look at our innermost feelings and release what no longer serves us. And we may be asked to work with our faith, with our imagination, with our dreams. We may be asked to work with our fears and our anxieties. We may be asked to work with our wholeness. And we may be asked to let go, as Pisces is so often about letting go, and to forgive, to reconcile, and to create peace in our lives. Individually and collectively, we may be called to serve others. And so, on a personal level, ways to work with Saturn in Pisces include becoming very creative, tapping into that imagination or that dream work, working on your dreams, as well as keeping a dream diary, um, cultivating a spiritual practice, and cultivating more faith in our daily lives, doing a lot of inner work for healing and shame, releasing grief, embracing our anxieties and our depressions or our mental health, becoming more aware about our mental health, taking time for retreat, taking time to connect with nature and the divine, to connect with ourselves and our innermost levels, to meditate and breathe, to dance, to again release what no longer serves us. and to face the consequences of the past and to make changes, to recognize our lack of action or our inaction, and then finally to make a contribution and to serve others.
Wow, so there are many ways that this changing of energy as Saturn moves into Pisces, we can approach and embrace almost. It's not just going to be a one size fits all, is what you're saying, right?
No, it's not. And it's going to be based, everyone has an individual chart,
Yeah.
and everyone has their chart unfold in a way that's personal to them. And Saturn does work with shaping who we are continually in the chart. And so this is going to be very much a personal journey for many people. Um, it will influence uh, Pisces the most. Um, and then it will also influence the signs of mutability, Gemini, Virgo, and Sagittarius.
Uh,
And so these planets, or these signs, those with planets and angles in the mutable signs, especially Pisces, they are going to receive the conjunctions, the squares, and the oppositions. And this year, Saturn is moving through the first 7 degrees of Pisces. And so anyone with planets between 0 and 8 degrees of the mutable signs is likely to feel this transit. Saturn is going to go retrograde on June 17th of 2023. And then it will go direct at 0 degrees Pisces in November on the 3rd. So Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, these signs will experience again the squares and oppositions of Saturn. And of course, anyone with Saturn in Pisces is going to experience a Saturn return. And for some, that may be a second Saturn return, but for a generation out there, that will be their first Saturn return.
right.
And then, of course, the water signs, Scorpio and Cancer, these signs will receive the trine of Saturn. And this is also important for those signs to be aware of because they will have the opportunity to work with Saturn in a more flowing or harmonious way.
Uh-huh.
The work is still going to be required. The effort is still going to be required because Saturn does ask responsibility of us, but it will be much easier for those signs to integrate Saturn into their lives with the trine aspect.
Wow, interesting. Yeah, so it's going to, whilst it may impact some signs more significantly, it's not necessarily going to impact every sign on a personal level, even though we do have this global overarching theme that which will unfold. Is that what we're saying?
That's what I'm saying. Yes, yes. There will be the global overarching themes of the collective. And Saturn is going to be working with the collective, and especially with Neptune transiting the later degrees of Pisces. I think we will see more of a collective influence on a global scale. But then there's also what is happening to each of us in our personal charts,
Yes.
in our
Yes.
personal lives.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that I think you said the next year, Saturn will move through the first 7 degrees of Pisces, and anyone who's got planets there, or the ascendant, or midheaven, or other points, will receive that conjunction from Saturn, and it will like bring it home to roost that Saturn will influence those people with planets in those positions, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
I don't have any planets in Pisces, so not.
And I would also like to add that anyone with planets around 6, 7, 8 degrees of Pisces or the mutable signs to pay attention to what Saturn is aspecting in their chart, especially around the time of June 17th, because Saturn will slow down to make its station to go retrograde. And when Saturn has slowed down and it is aspecting a planet, this can be a very significant time period for an individual. And so that is also something to be aware of in the chart.
So that's June 17th of 2023.
June 17th of 2023.
Okay.
Yes.
So we've got that coming up ahead. Wow.
Yeah. And perhaps the best way forward that one can really work with Saturn transit is by turning inward, um, turning towards our inner foundation and our shadows to embrace our suffering, acknowledge any confusion that we may have,
Okay.
where we feel disillusioned in our lives, um, how we may feel overwhelmed or helpless, and to see what lessons that has for you, what lies beyond those fears and those shadows and the darkness. Again, it takes a lot of work to really live a purposeful life. And so Saturn, um, and being under the influence of Jupiter and Neptune, is really asking us to go deep, to discover, and to do the work rather than to try escape or to avoid it.
All right. So there's quite a lot there, a lot of inward work, it appears, that many, many people will be embarking upon during this period.
Yes, yes,
Right.
yeah. But this is not all, I want to say this is not all doom and gloom, and it is very serious. It is sobering. But this is also the opportunity for us to get in touch with our own essence, to work on our dreams, to decide what has meaning and truth for us, what is purposeful in our lives, and to establish a framework to support that. And it is an opportunity to walk that path of the mystic, even just a little bit. And that does require the work, and it is the opportunity of Saturn and Pisces.
Right. Amazing. So interesting times ahead. Clearly, right?
Yes, yes, very. Yeah.
Okay. So, Christine, you've shared with us many deep insights into the Saturn in Pisces and what we can anticipate. Could you perhaps share a little bit about the type of astrology you do? So maybe some of our viewers would be able to relate to that or even contact you later.
Yes, I consider myself an integrative astrologer. I practice both modern and traditional philosophies, and I draw techniques from both sides um, of traditional and modern Western astrology. I offer consultations.
Okay.
I love to help people connect with their inner essence. I do solar return forecasting. I do astrocartography, and I'm also building a horary background as well.
Fantastic. So if somebody like you spoke about in the beginning thought, oh, I need to approach an astrologer, you could help them with the introductory chart readings and going deep
Yes.
there.
I love teaching. I am a
Okay.
teaching astrologer.
Right.
And I love to work with my students and teach. I teach on a one-on-one level, and I really love to customize my classes to my students' interests and to delve deep within the charts.
And
And
teaching online there or in person?
I do it I do it via Zoom, and I
Okay.
also do it in person. And I actually meet with my students. This isn't a course where, one watches the video and then does a little homework assignment and that kind of thing. This is actually where I sit down and I actually work with the student and answer their questions and try to guide them towards developing their astrological skills, their ability to read the chart, their ability to go deeper into the chart.
Fantastic. So how could people contact you then? What's the best way to reach out?
The best way to reach out to me is through my website, www.skyblueclarity.com. And then my email address is also skyblueclarity@gmail.com.
Perfect. So we can invite people to contact you through that method.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Christine, for being here today and for sharing your meaningful insights into the Saturn entry to Pisces. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you, and I look forward to seeing how things unfold for us all in the next 2.5 years.
It's been an absolute pleasure to be here, Allison, and I too as well look forward to seeing how things unfold with Saturn in Pisces. And I wish everyone a wonderful journey with Saturn in Pisces.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. So there we have it. That was Saturn's transit through Pisces, which is starting off in 2023. Other transits for 2023 is the Pluto ingress into Aquarius, and you can watch that video where I spoke with Arwen about that right here. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.